Would you call yourself a math person? If you're like most people, you would say no. After all, it's pretty common knowledge that math just isn't something a lot of people are good at. Given that and the popular belief that math is inherently a tough subject, it seems that not many can even call themselves math people. Well, I'm here to tell you that the idea of the math person as you know it is simply not true. With the right work, anyone can succeed in math. But if that's the case, then why do so many people struggle in math?
To explain why, we need to understand the factors that go on throughout a student's school life, starting in early childhood. One factor is dyscalculia, which is a math learning disability that affects about 5 to 10% of people.
Some of the students that I've had in previous years that couldn't calculate. They couldn't multiply or divide in their head. They didn't know their times tables. And it wasn't necessarily an issue from their teacher. It's because they had a disability where they just couldn't get it. There's a disability called dyscalculia of students who don't calculate. They can't calculate in their head very quickly because the part of their brain just doesn't want to do it, or it needs strengthening.
People with dyscalculia have trouble understanding key concepts in math such as more and less, trouble connecting words for numbers with specific amounts, and trouble remembering rules in math. One cause of dyscalculia is genetics. There isn't a single gene behind dyscalculia, but there are many genes that play a small part. Those genes tend to impact reading skills as well, so it's common for someone to have both dyscalculia and dyslexia, which is a disability that makes reading and spelling more difficult. While dyscalculia is important to consider, it only affects about 5 to 10% of people, which means that for most of us, we can't exactly link our math skills with a condition like dyscalculia. An article by Big Think makes an interesting point on this. It quotes a book from developmental psychologist Steven Pinker in How the Mind Works, stating that, on evolutionary grounds, it would be surprising if children were mentally equipped for school mathematics. These tools were invented recently in history and only in a few cultures, too late and too local to stamp the human genome. He goes on to argue that although we have certain mathematical intuitions, such as how toddlers can compare the number of dots in pictures, these intuitions are not the same as the highly formal rule systems we start learning in elementary school. In other words, while there are some intuitions that are important in math, they're only part of the story here, because the actual formal rules in math are something that has to be taught, not something people are born good at. What's more relevant is the amount and quality of the practice students receive.
I do feel that some people's brains are wired in such a way that math may come easier to others, but I don't believe that there's such a thing as not a math person.
Math is a skill, and a skill is built. Like basketball is a skill, you don't get it by just sitting back in the background. You get it by actually practicing. That's why a lot of math worksheets have tons and tons of similar problems on them, because math is a skill that you build. It's not something you just know.
The article Adding It Up, Helping Children Learn Mathematics describes 5 branches of what makes someone good at math. The 2 we'll focus on here are procedural fluency and conceptual understanding. Procedural fluency is basically being able to solve problems efficiently and correctly. Students should be able to carry out methods to add, subtract, multiply, and divide whole numbers, for example. These skills need practice and drilling, which comes from worksheets and times tables. Conceptual understanding means being able to understand the reasoning behind the methods used, and being able to mentally connect ideas with each other. Conceptual understanding makes it easier to develop procedural fluency, but first you need procedural fluency in order to develop conceptual understanding. According to an article from Edutopia, pressured to cover every state standard with equal emphasis, teachers often can't spend extra time on fundamentals like memorizing multiplication tables, or even on the standards themselves. That means a lot of classes don't allocate enough time for students to practice what they learned, meaning students won't get that procedural fluency, meaning they won't be able to make the higher level connections for conceptual understanding. That's a problem because math is a subject that relies heavily on prior knowledge. If they haven't fully learned the basic concepts, they'll fall behind in more complex concepts.
I see some students they don't know how to use the calculator, or they don't know some mental math, and it does affect them because they are a slower learner in that sense. But if you learn it, then it will be okay, but you definitely need that prior knowledge.
I couldn't really remember things from the previous year because I just wasn't paying attention that much. Since it just sort of piled on, it just made it really hard for me.
So far, we've talked about the early factors of math skills, which include dyscalculia and the practice students receive. There are also later factors to math skills, which prevent students from fulfilling their potential in math later on. One of the biggest things that affects students over time is the myth of the math person, which is the belief that people are naturally born good or bad at math. An article from The Atlantic describes this scenario. When children first enter math class, they have different levels of preparation depending on how much math they were taught at home. The more prepared students often score better in tests and homework, while the unprepared students are more likely to be frustrated at the subject. The unprepared students, not realizing the prepared students had previous experience, assume they're just not math people and stop pushing themselves in the subject, believing that they'll never improve. I must emphasize that the math person myth is not true. As I've discussed, much of what makes students good or bad at math is from the practice they've had, rather than from something innate. Despite that, the myth that someone is or isn't a math person is still prevalent, and makes a lot of students adopt what's called the fixed mindset, which is the belief that your natural abilities are fixed and cannot be developed just by working hard or listening to advice from others.
I think people where math doesn't come naturally to them, I think that it starts out as not natural and then they just think, oh, I'm not good at math, I'm not going to try anymore, and then they just tend to give up on themselves, and so they don't keep pushing and they don't keep trying to learn a new way and a different way to correct themselves.
Many students expect math to be a hard subject due to what they hear from those around them, including family and friends.
I think a lot of times students hear from their parents that math is hard or math is not fun. So when they're little, when they hear that from their parents, they think that that's how math is.
I'm told that, wow, I must be so smart because I'm good at math. Well, why does being good at math make me any smarter than someone who's good at history or English? And I think it's because of this stigma, this idea that math is so much more difficult than everything else.
The fixed mindset can come from teachers as well.
The teachers that I've had in the past, they've always told me that I wasn't good at it, that I wouldn't go anywhere if I didn't learn how to do it, but they wouldn't put any effort to help me. They would always just doubt me. They'd be like, you're not good at this, I can't help you, I give up on helping you, you're hard to work with. Just basically disencouraging me to do what they're intended to do, which is teach me. So I kind of just lost motivation to work towards being better at math.
According to an article from KQED, teachers often believe their students can't achieve at the highest level, and in turn, students believe that about themselves. In other words, when teachers think their students can't do high-level math, the students internalize that and believe the same thing. Students also tend to feel that they have to be perfect in math class in order to be considered good at math. Thus, when a student gets a math problem wrong, they take it very personally.
Usually when I make a mistake, I kind of feel kind of disappointed in myself because, I don't really feel like I should be struggling so hard. It just feels like that because it's the only way that it'll feel right is if I just do it perfectly.
Personally, me, it's really hard to make mistakes in life in general, so especially in math, after being so good at it for a long period of time, when I make a mistake, it tends to make me really upset, and then I'll be really mad for maybe the rest of the day or something.
A possible side effect of the fixed mindset is math anxiety, which is when someone feels a sense of panic when doing something math-related.
Every time it comes down to a test, for math specifically, I get really nervous and I just forget everything that I just learned, or for allowed notes, the notes all of a sudden don't make sense even though they're my personal notes that I wrote.
Math anxiety manifests itself much like other forms of anxiety, with symptoms that include worry or panic, tense muscles, increased heart rate, sweaty palms, or lightheadedness. Math anxiety affects working memory, which is the type of memory needed to store important details in your brain, such as relevant numbers or the steps needed to solve an equation. And because math anxiety occupies that working memory, it's harder for students with anxiety to focus, making it harder to solve math problems.
I tend to have a lot of test anxiety. It really affects how well my tests come out. Because usually if I'm freaking out about it, I don't do as well because I'm just so busy freaking out about how bad I'm gonna do.
Now we have the early factors and the later factors. Let's summarize what we've covered so far. In early childhood, poor math skills can come from dyscalculia, a disability that inhibits the brain's ability to do math. But not everybody who's bad at math necessarily has a disability. For most people, math skill comes down to the amount and quality of practice they received. Procedural fluency and conceptual understanding are both important, But if classrooms don't have enough time to build procedural fluency, students won't be able to understand important concepts and develop conceptual understanding. And because math relies on prior knowledge, students who haven't learned basic concepts can't learn more complex concepts. Now, when a student realizes they're not so strong in math at first, they tend to fall into a fixed mindset by concluding that they're just not a math person. Under that false belief that they can't improve, they stop trying in their math classes, keeping them from reaching their full potential. This belief that there's a math person is very common, and it may come from teachers. Many students feel guilty when they get a problem wrong as well. Math anxiety is a product of the math person belief, and inhibits working memory, making it even harder to focus in math class.
As you can see, these concepts are all interconnected, which might leave you wondering, what can be done to untangle this mess?
There are a number of things teachers can do to help students who are struggling in math. While the fixed mindset is significant in preventing students from performing well in math, the growth mindset can help boost student performance in math. The growth mindset is the belief that you can develop your natural abilities by working hard or listening to advice from others. The first thing teachers can do is integrate the growth mindset in class.
I encourage a growth mindset right from day one in my classes. We spend some time discussing what it means to have a growth or a fixed mindset, and I have posters in my room that talk about what it means to have a growth mindset, and I do my best throughout the year to model having a growth mindset, and again, just encouraging and continuing to remind my students to have confidence in themselves and to keep trying.
When students feel confident, they don't give up. They want to keep doing more. And that's what I try to instill in them. Try to do that positive feeling about math. The more you think that you're going to be better at it, you will be definitely better at it. We don't want to think about it as this is too challenging, I cannot do it. No, it could be challenging, but we're going to keep trying. We're never going to give up.
It's also beneficial for teachers to change their mindset about their own math skills. Professor Joe Bowler, co-author of a study at Stanford Graduate School of Education, explains that as teachers reevaluate their own potential as learners, they are more likely to embrace new forms of teaching. This helps their students build confidence, develop positive attitudes, and ultimately achieve better test scores. Teachers can also help students learn that mistakes are okay, and they can give feedback on the mistakes students make.
A couple of years ago, I tried to alleviate this getting it wrong, would you just get a big giant X on your paper? I implemented a system where instead of getting it wrong, we called it, you made a silly mistake. And a silly mistake would be the tiniest error maybe at the end of their calculations where they forgot the negative was there, or they forgot that negative divided by negative makes a positive. That's another common error that students encounter in math. And that did wonders for my students because they were like, oh, I didn't get it wrong. I just made a silly mistake.
Since math relies on prior knowledge, teachers should ensure that all students understand the more basic ideas before moving on to advanced ideas.
When I teach math, I go back to the very basics to catch and gather all the students who may have missed that. For example, if I have a student that doesn't know how to solve two-step equations, I will go back to negative numbers, and we're going to do -1 plus -1. Because a two-step equation requires the negative numbers, and that's where students make the most mistakes in math, honestly, is with negative numbers, because they didn't get a firm grasp when they first learned it in 6th grade.
Teachers should engage students by asking them questions throughout a problem to get them to think.
When I teach in the classroom, I try to ask more questions. The more questions I ask makes them think. And when a student is stuck with a problem, I don't give the answer right away to them. Again, I ask a question so that they can think of what do they do at that point. That way it helps them use that same process later on, because I don't believe in just giving away the answer to them, because that's not how they learn. To me, I think they have to think. The thinking comes by asking more questions.
To help students with dyscalculia, teachers can allow them to use calculators to focus on more important concepts.
When I encounter a student like that, typically in the high school, we don't calculate anymore. They actually get a calculator. And instead, they have to learn those higher order concepts that are in algebra or geometry. So in order to learn those concepts, they do need to learn the underlying concepts, which helps them immensely because they're no longer calculating and they're learning the beginnings or the basics of that fundamental math issue.
Teachers can also visualize ideas for students with dyscalculia through coins, blocks, and puzzles, give them a list of the math formulas used in class, use concrete examples to connect math to real life, and they can use graphic organizers to break down math problems into steps. Those are all possible ways teachers can help students improve their skills. There are also a number of things you can do if you're a student who's struggling in math. To start, you can work to adopt a growth mindset and persevere.
Yeah, I've had to work really hard in high school to get where I am, but it's all worth it in the end, and you'll feel very proud of yourself if you do work hard.
I've struggled with the growth and the fixed mindset a couple of times actually myself. Sometimes it gets hard and I think that I'm not going to figure it out, but then I remember that you just have to keep trying, try to do things different ways and try to figure it out, and then you'll get it eventually.
When you adopt a growth mindset, you will learn to enjoy math.
I learned to like math by, first of all, learning it, because when you don't learn math, you don't understand it, you don't like it. But when you learn it, then that's when you learn to like it. So when you really take the time to understand it, you will learn to like it like how I did.
Along with that, it's important to remember that mistakes are part of the learning process.
I'm mostly just it's a mistake and move on, because during math, you're gonna make a mistake, so you might as well just get over it. When I was younger, I'd always be hard on myself if I forgot something, but then as you grow older, you're just it's gonna be a mistake. It's life, you're gonna mess up.
As a memory strategy, you can teach others the concepts you're learning in class.
Definitely. I think that teaching others as I was learning definitely helped me, because a lot of the times if I didn't understand something, I would have to re-explain it, and then it made more sense in my head. So while I was teaching others, it would make more sense in my head as we moved along.
If you have math anxiety, you can find ways to cope in order to help you focus more.
For my IEP, I mostly get pulled into another room so a teacher can sit there and help me. Being able to listen to music during the test would also help me concentrate more, because I wasn't worried about what was going on around me.
It's more just however you need to, because for me personally, I just need to stop doing what I'm doing and go do something else to take my mind off of it, and then come back when I'm calm and when I'm collected, so that I can re-look at the problem with a fresh mind and be okay, I know what I'm doing, just do it again, and then do the problem fresh on a fresh piece of paper with nothing around you, and just figure it out over again.
Finally, if you're stuck on a problem, attending one-on-one tutoring is beneficial.
I think tutoring is pretty helpful. It's just extra time for me to figure out certain concepts and really get it down.
Tutoring does help you, especially in class. The teacher can't always just be at your desk, they have to help others. So that's why tutoring is good if you take the responsibility out of your time to learn, so it just all helps you at the end, so yeah.
Overall, if you're struggling with math, you should remember the growth mindset and persevere. Remember that it's okay to make mistakes, teach others in order to reinforce what you're learning, find ways to cope with math anxiety, and attend one-on-one tutoring.
While teachers are there to help you learn, it is ultimately up to you to put in the effort. Remember that no one is born a math person, everyone can improve their math skills if they work at it, and when you've improved, you will enjoy math. You can do this. I trust you.